welcome back everyone on another episode of the People's Perspective on Development podcast, where we're going to explore topics related to urban planning, design, public space, and community development. I'm your host, Tunisia, and today we have an exciting discussion lined up for you. I have my dear friend, Bakithi, who we studied town planning together at the University of Pretoria, and we are also planning professionals currently working in the private sector. Bakithi, can you give us just an introduction? Welcome yourself to the people.
Hey T, thank you so much for having me, and greetings to your listeners. My name is Bakithi Mngomezulu, professional town planner, consulting engineer, and social facilitator. And yeah, man, I'm just truly privileged to be on your platform. Thank you for having me.
We welcome you. Today we're going to have, great discussions on just functionality of public space. What does public space mean? And we're really excited to have your input and your thoughts. But before we get there, I just want the audience to get to know you a little bit better, as I do, and, share with us, what was it like, your upbringing, where particularly did you grow up? What was life like? And how did you decide what you wanted to be?
So I think point of departure is I should warn your listeners, I've currently got the flu. So if they're hearing me clearing my throat, don't think I'm rude or I don't get mic etiquette. I'm fighting for my life.
It's not COVID, right?
What is COVID again?
Who's that? Okay.
Okay. So yeah, man, as I mentioned, my name is Bakithi Mngomezulu. I was born in Maritzburg in Grace Hospital. And I grew up in Ulundi for a year of my life. Thereafter, me and my family moved to Middleburg in Mpumalanga. And that move was fueled by my grandfather being appointed as the first black general in the Middleburg and Highveld region. So that was a massive achievement for him. I went to school in Middleburg, went to a Christian school called Middleburg Christian School.
Yes.
For high school, I went to school in our neighboring town, which was called Witbank then, Emalakeni now.
Yes,
and I went to St. Thomas Aquinas School, aka the convent. And yeah, man, from there on, UP and to the world.
Well, that was quite a journey and also a transition of space, since we're town planners here and we're speaking about location.
For sure.
What was it like, that transition from, of course, yes, you were obviously born in Maritzburg, but living in Mpumalanga and coming to Gauteng, what was that experience like for you?
Oh man, it was like night and day. Fortunately, me being in Pretoria, it's almost like a natural transition from a town like Middleburg, because Pretoria isn't your typical metropolitan. Matter of fact, I wouldn't even classify it as that. Cities like Joburg and even Cape Town are proper metropolitans, whereas Pretoria still has a bit of a small town feel, small town vibe. So coming here as a youngster, the first sort of massive change is that it's just the extent of activities that are available to you, be it the infrastructure, the amenities, slow soccer grounds, indoor soccer, and just the amounts of people you come across from different backgrounds. I mean, Middleburg, for the most part, you start to learn who your demographic is.
Definitely.
You get to Pretoria and you're thrown off. So yeah.
Just in terms of sizes and extent of space and culture.
It's insane.
Bakithi, we now know that obviously you're a town planner and where you're from, but did you always want to be a town planner? Did you know what it was from the beginning? Was it a first choice on your application to UP? Or did you also get denied like the rest of us to get into civil engineering?
That is too personal. Okay, first of all, too personal. So I always get this kind of question, especially when I go back and lecture at UP, and chat to some students who are like mentees of mine on the side. And I say my journey towards town planning wasn't as simple as in matric I said, wow, Dad, I want to be a town planner. And I was completely different. So when I left school, my first year post-high school, I was studying a degree in computer science at UJ.
Yeah.
Right? Because, the narrative at the time, and so today, is tech is the future, tech is where the money is.
Yes.
Facebook, everyone wants to go make their own
100%.
Facebook. You know what I'm saying? I realized I'm not the person for tech. I'm too personable. I'm too people-orientated. I can't work in isolation. I enjoy working in groups. Then I transitioned to a BCom General at UP in 2014. And I can summarize my time there as unfocused, unintentional, and just I didn't know what my why for being there was.
Definitely.
I had everything. I was in res. I was I had nothing that I lacked except for the reason why. And that's why that sort of, at come end of the year, I chose not to go back.
Okay.
And then I spent 2015 at home.
All right.
Right back in Middelburg and Mpumalanga, trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life. And that's how I came across the built environment industry. And slap bang in the middle of that, I found town planning to be a field that I thought, at the very least, I would enjoy it.
All right.
You know, what the remuneration is, what the social view of it is, this isn't something I was so aware of. For the most part, people didn't know what a town planner is. And it's as simple in the name, I plan towns. But they didn't know what it was. And that's how I stumbled across this industry of ours, which is urban planning. And
I can relate a lot. I had no idea what a town planner was. I also did BCom because some parents don't allow you to take a gap year. And mine were one of those. They were like, you figure it out as we go along. And I did BCom in first year because, again, that's where the money's at. Most people are more familiar with that career choice as well. And it was a failing initiative, mainly because I was doing it same reason, not knowing why, but I knew I had to. Yeah. And I had applied for civil engineering, so that story is me, and I am not good at science. So I did not make the cut, and that's how I found out about town planning. So by method of elimination, it came back. So I can relate to that. Having a why is very important, and also in the space that we're in, it's very important because we've got a plan for others. Yeah. Now that you're obviously in the space and you're in the practice of town planning, what are the key areas that you're most passionate about?
So working for a private sector company, remember the objective there is always the bottom line. So you go for the most lucrative projects, which often involve multiple disciplines of the built environment field, from engineers to architects, and our company BVI, we house all those disciplines.
All right.
You don't really get exposed to, well, how do I put this? If you walk in there with the wrong mentality and a bit of a
one-track mind,
you think it's all about making money. But I take it back to my academic days at UP. When it comes to a topic in town planning, which is close to my heart, we had to do our mini dissertation. You remember that? Yeah.
All the reading.
So my supervisor was a Prof. Karina Landman, who is just an expert on public open space and all things to do with design, architecture, and I used to just love her lectures because I liked physically sitting down and designing a space for a settlement and stating what this space would do for the settlement. You get what I'm saying? So she had a research topic that was, I think it was phrased as the impact or the power of public spaces in transforming a post-apartheid South African settlement. And when I heard that, I said, well, God damn.
What is that? Where do we? Yes.
Yeah, because another reason why I felt strongly about town planning is I understood, I couldn't put the jargon to it, but I understood that the way our settlements were set up and operated just didn't make sense. You know, the fact that people have to spend more than half of their income on travel doesn't make sense. So obviously a town planner in the name should be able to remedy that, right? Yes. So yeah, man, that topic on the power of public space to transform a community, I view it as a low-hanging fruit, a quick win, which has such exponential impacts on the character and quality of life of a community.
You actually just sparked my enthusiasm here, because at the end of the day, what we do is for the people, and putting pen to paper means that you're drawing ideas from the community first
100%.
And you're designing for what they need and not what we think they need, which is very, very important, especially if you have a passion thereof. When it comes to public space design, what have you noticed about locations that influence how the quality of the space is shaped?
So unfortunately, in the South Africa that we live in right now, and I say we because I believe there's room for change for our kids.
Definitely.
We live in a space where all the best spaces are put in the areas where people who don't really need them live in. So it's all your affluent areas, already developed areas, and your historical black townships have no sign of those type of amenities.
Yes.
And often those are the people who need it the most because they don't have the biggest yard. They don't
definitely
have the Weber bra in the back, the wooden deck. You know,
this is my property boundary, stay out.
Exactly. There's more of a need for shared spaces and shared amenities in low income demographic, which
Definitely.
historically, unfortunately, is people of color. So lack of investment in those type of spaces in, I'd say, our areas.
Yes. And now, we've seen that there's actually a transition. Does that mean that public space is only available at quality levels because of impact of money? Or is it only available in safety and by means of street furniture and quality design because people can pay for it?
So I think it's a bit of a hybrid of both of those answers. The amount of resources you have at your disposal directly determines your quality of life. Unfortunately, that's the capitalist society we live in.
Yes,
and we can do nothing but operate within those parameters. Unless you're an official who works directly in the department that can work against that.
Yes.
And in doing your job, provide amenities and services to the people who need them the most. So that when you go home and take your hot shower in your 4 ways mansion, someone can do the same in Vugani or Streka or Organic Market. You get what I'm saying? So, unfortunately, the reality is, from a monetary point of view, the affluent areas can afford to have the beautiful parks. I mean, I was in Melrose last night.
Yes.
And I was looking at how the precinct is set up, and that's a form of public space expression. Public space isn't only a park. It's any platform where people are able to walk, where pedestrian movement is prioritized. You get me? And I was like, I'm walking around, I'm seeing 13-year-olds with iPhone 14 Plus Max pluses. I'm seeing Lambos, cars that I've never seen on the streets elsewhere drive through here.
Definitely.
And it's like this la-la land of wealth. And they've got this excess of resources and amenities that people in the more disadvantaged areas couldn't dream of, but they need it the most.
100%. It almost feels that now with this, form of urban-rural disconnect, we live on urban islands in our own ways, that we forget that, public space and life that takes place in between also matters, and it also connects people. And at the end of the day, when we choose these winner cities such or nodes or areas like Melrose Arch, Sandton City, we are marginalizing the disadvantaged who cannot afford to be in these spaces.
100%.
And that is the key topic of today's discussion with you today, is why public space? What is the importance of designing and planning quality spaces that are safe, that shape how an individual feels in a space, and what do they experience, especially pedestrians, because I feel that when you're in the urban area, you're very much known for private cars, and those that walk and use public transport are often forgotten in between these spaces. Just to touch on, what is your experience working in these affluent areas? Do you have any experience that you've done? Maybe just in terms of your own travel between work and home, what do you think we've got more of here that you'd like to see in these disadvantaged communities?
I think the key thing I'd like to see, and this is the advantage of being a third world country, and that sounds like a bit of a paradox, because third world country advantage, but the advantage is we still have quick wins to achieve. So pedestrian sidewalks, good conditioned roads, services, street lights, street furniture.
Definitely.
That's simple, man. That's all you need, and it makes a massive impact on the character of the area. Safety, a well-lit area is less likely to have criminal elements there
100%.
than a dark area. And that's what we find in most cases, man. The forgotten settlements, as you said them.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now that we understand what public space is, where does public life meet public space, how do you think location actually impacts quality of space? Because right now, when you look at planning and development, we're actually looking for the most affluent areas where there's already investment, there's already development, there is already public infrastructure, transport, and what happens to the areas that are displaced and that are further away from these winning urban nodes?
The reality is nothing, because this is the real world, unfortunately. Public space provision and beautification as a whole is often reserved for, like you said, the affluent neighborhoods. But the irony of that is it's a bit of a catch-22. It's usually in affluent neighborhoods. This is before I delve into our spatial planning history as a country. In affluent neighborhoods, often there is money to service these things because people are rate-paying citizens in a way, through property tax. Usually their income is higher, so it can go towards the actual beautification of an area, right? my perspective is beautification should be a standard wherever you go. And due to the nature of our country's history, socioeconomically, the people who need these amenities the most aren't getting them.
Definitely.
What's the point of putting a good public hospital in I don't know, man, in Ilovo, when most of the time people are going to go to the nearest Netcare or Life Hospital?
100%.
That hospital needs to be in the heart of Alex. Needs to be near Vugani. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
Where people actually who need it the most and need that amenity can use it, you know? On the other hand, all these amenities placed in affluent areas go to waste because most of the residents here have their own big yard where they go play in there and have their own brides. You know what I'm saying?
This is my property boundary.
Exactly.
No one else come through.
They even have an SG diagram. They're like, hey, buddy,
and this is
coordinate here.
registration.
Exactly. So it's unfortunate where we see the people who need the impact that public space brings the most aren't afforded it. And 29 years later, after our democracy, that still has barely changed. That pattern hasn't changed in our settlements, you know?
It almost makes you feel that quality of space, good housing, in terms of public space, we're talking about maintained parks, safety in the area, is only accessible to those that can afford it. What do you think of that?
We live in a country, we live in a world where you get what you can pay for.
Yes.
Or you get what you can negotiate for, unfortunately. And that just points at our failed institutions, man. We were taught this in varsity. A city is supposed to serve like a salad bowl.
Definitely.
All kinds of a mixture of resources. And the government's supposed to maintain that salad bowl, not to spoon feed you the salad, but give you an offering to pick whatever you need from it to make the life you need.
Definitely.
Our governments can't even do that right now for a variety of reasons. You know? Let's not go for the lazy reasons. A variety of political, institutional, social reasons. You get what I'm saying? And in the end, beyond us being unhappy about being stuck in traffic because of load shedding, we're failing the people who need these services the most. That's who it really impacts.
Being in the private sector of development, do you feel that we prioritize the design of public space? Do you think that we design spaces that serve community needs, especially people who walk and take public transport?
I think at my firm, we certainly do make that a key element of our design process, considering, for example, pedestrian sidewalks, pedestrian furniture, in whatever townships we develop, as well as the need to have clear amenities within sight. Or we recommend that as part of our proposals to clients. For example, we work with quite a few clients in the Northern Cape.
Okay.
The mining is big, and many townships are popping up there around the mining activity. And at the core of any of our proposals or township attachments, we put many amenities in public spaces because we understand the need for those in future.
Okay.
Right now, there may be no activity, but once you have residents there, you can't have the residents going to work or going to the local spa. You need a young facility there. But in general, in the private sector, there's no regard really for creating impactful public space. It's more of a tick box exercise, as most planning tools now are becoming. You know, whether it's your IDP or SDF, they speak about public open space network, but how much are we really implementing and protecting these institutions? It's crazy. What do you think about this?
100%. I feel that when you are in a big corporate firm, we tend to think about how can we find a return on investment, and the alternative that works against us is that we are dependent on government funding, which ultimately comes down to the fact that they have salaries to pay in a municipality, for example, before any development can take place. And that top-down approach, I don't think, is working for us anymore. And we have a lot of spatial planning policy that has a lot of procedure, but how much of it actually is for implementation and development in the practice of town planning?
We definitely live in a time where it's procedure first, and all protocol observed, opposed to actually getting things done and creating impact. It's a sad place to be, but I think that's part of why people like you and I joined the planning fraternity. We're hoping to be part of the wave of planning professionals that shake it up and take it away from being about a certain person and more about being the people.
The challenge thereof that is when you have the mind of change and the thought process of, okay, we need to prioritize people-driven development. Where do you find that influence when at the same time town planning is also a career for you and I to eat? That's a huge challenge that we're currently having, and where do you prioritize the people, you prioritize public space, and then at the same time you have the fact that you still have to work and earn a living and exist in these spaces.
The truth is, T, we don't know. And I think this is when it would be great to have some insight from our mentors.
Yes.
The people in the planning field who we spoke to before we stepped in or while we're in. To hear from them, because I'm sure everyone starts off with earnest intentions at first.
Definitely.
But like you said, the need to survive, human instinct overrides everything else. So if if you're an environmental freak, and you care about the environment, I know you've got a keen passion for that.
You know what I mean? And this is something that we have to go through on a daily basis when you prioritize public space, because public space is not just streets and roads, it's also parks.
Exactly.
And parks have become a space where people try to avoid because of the unsafety and the perceptions it's created over the years. Your areas of privatization and gated communities have taken over looking after the parks within those communities while marginalizing those that cannot afford it. Yeah. Where do our kids go?
So, when you say this, it reminds me, I studied at Tux with you, obviously.
Yes.
There's a park across where I used to stay. I used to stay at the Wall, 1135 Francis Barter Street.
Springbok
Park.
Oh, my word.
Springbok Park is one of the national parks in our country. It's basically, I'd say it's a key point.
I really
when it comes
didn't even know that.
Yeah, remember we had that assignment first year?
Oh my gosh.
It's actually a green space key point, if we're speaking from a public space point of view.
Yes.
And when I first went there, the park was, it was in good condition, relatively good order, and I was like, wow, this is beautiful, So I stayed at the Wall for all 4 years of my undergrad.
Yeah.
And each year I saw it progressively getting worse and worse to the point where from the outside looking in, you can't even see into the park.
Definitely.
Before
there was no
it was porous.
maintenance.
Remember, that's also a characteristic of a good public space. It must be porous, there must be visibility, transparent, Now you walk in there, it's like the Chamber of Secrets in Harry Potter.
No one knows you're in there.
And therefore, no one goes there because now it's become a platform for vagrants, for people, for people who have ill intentions for you, criminal activity. And that defeats the whole point of a public space. It shouldn't become a white elephant. It's a platform for interaction.
Especially in the middle of a student haven.
Exactly.
Its location, being in Hatfield, in that area, that would have been a space for interaction, for activity, social interaction.
Yeah.
For students to come together and have a braai, be able to utilize that space in a safe manner.
And we used to, man. I took a nap there as well, I think, in the second year or something. But yeah.
It's a point of study, and we can even use that as a reference of, going back to how do we study this public space?
Yeah.
How do we study public life so that we can actually improve our policies and improve being a town planner in this industry? So I'm going to take you back to a case study that I actually went through. Okay. We're going to start from an international perspective just to see what are the core principles and objectives that they use to design successful public spaces, and then we're going to move into bringing it back to South Africa.
All right.
So there's a very interesting example that I came across called People's Park Square, and lively urban node located in the heart of Chinatown in Singapore. And that's key here, Singapore, because when we think Singapore, we obviously think crazy rich Asians and that affluent airport that we saw. We think it is well used throughout the week, and the focus of much of this development is on how it brings together pedestrian activity, quality road infrastructure, as well as parks and recreational spaces and retail space.
Okay.
So it actually was built in 1970, so this is how long it's been around, and more than that, it has different components, what we call mixed-use development.
Of course.
So for mixed-use development, it means that there's an aspect of residential, so people can live there. There's an aspect of commercial and business, and of course, play area.
Yeah.
What they use here in terms of criteria for successful public spaces is firstly amenities, meaning furnishing. Seating, tables, telephone lines. I don't even know if we still have public telephones and if they exist around here.
I don't think they work, but they are still there.
And in terms of aesthetic, food, beverages, retail, restaurants, those areas. And then how do these areas look? How do they attract the public? And then last but not least, of course, we've got the importance of walkways, quality, distance, height, maintenance, and so forth.
Yeah.
And then just in terms of the activities, what makes a successful public space is firstly circulation. how do people move?
Yeah.
How do cars move? How do they interact and also create space for each other? Because that's another thing. I sometimes think we create a divide between a pedestrian and a car.
That's so in line with our history. Like, we don't know how to integrate things. We struggle.
No.
Anyway,
I think that comes with the competition era of our our economic system and politics.
Yeah.
But
Anyway.
that's a topic for another day. And then just variety of uses and land use, all right? So we're looking at, do we incorporate some residential? A lot of the times we build massive mega housing projects that are disconnected from basic service and community facilities.
And what's the point of that?
How do we create a wholesome lifestyle? And that is the key of public space. Bakithi, now that we've had a discussion on just bringing back, firstly, your experience, where you've come from, how does your link of childhood experience, schooling system, bring you back into why you are a town planner. We've just discussed Singapore, which is a very developed country and has been doing quite well in terms of aesthetic, development infrastructure, public space. Is there any examples that you have, perhaps, that you can think about that do inspire you?
So when you mentioned Singapore, it took me back to one of our lectures where we learned about the Asian tigers.
Oh, yes.
As a third world country, as they call us, it's always good to look at examples of countries similar to you. It's one thing to look at Alabama, you know what I'm saying, or look at New York.
Don't know why we still do that.
But if we look within Africa and some of our compatriots, I guess, in terms of developing stage, it gives good lessons for the future.
Yes.
So there's a park in Bangkok, Thailand, called the Chulalongkorn Centenary Park. Right?
All right.
And what I love about this is that this public space it's designed as a park that can hold up to 1 million gallons of water.
My goodness.
Right? So in a way, it's a lifeline. And the reason why this feature I mentioned is special is because Thailand, or Bangkok rather, is a city which is sinking by 2 centimeters a year.
Shit.
So now you can use public space to respond to some of your environmental threats as well.
Definitely.
If people could
That's
just
smart.
see beyond like the aesthetic of public space and what it can actually serve to be, it would be amazing. So furthermore, I mean, they mention here that this park fills the gap in green space for Bangkok residents. It's also designed to reduce risks associated with the seasonal rain. So during the rain or flooding season, people can use the park as a safe haven. And that's where you get the real purpose of a park. It's for the community, by the community, and protected by the residents of the community.
And actually has an environmental aspect to it as well, is that it makes space for the fact that we do care about the environment and we take climate change into consideration.
Exactly. And this is where you combine sort of quasi-public sector with the public interest. The park is actually located on the grounds of the Chulalongkorn University.
All right.
Usually in South Africa, universities are these islands that exist by themselves away from the public. But if you give the residents of a society some benefits to the university being there, because Lord knows we can't all afford it.
Definitely.
At least, let there be some benefit to it. It has even greater meaning. It's no longer a public space. Now it's a platform for all of us. Degreed or not degreed, educated, rich, poor, whatever the case.
Which it should have been. I mean, many a times education is for the public and it is a community space. And now, unfortunately, with privatization, taking the forefront, we don't even have access to those libraries, those public spaces that create conversation, those public spaces that become meeting points. And for example, what you just described now is that these are also spaces for the public to engage with the facilities that we build and we implement as town planners. Many a times we build, for example, let's use the university. We've built a university for school, for education, and to empower our population, but there's a limited access to who can use it. And what happens if you are, intrigued by knowledge, by wanting to borrow a book? You have to travel to a space which is usually in the central business districts, which many people don't want to travel to, where you can access a public library. And I think that conflict of public and private also works against why we don't have successful public spaces.
100%. And I think, listen, man, we say that these universities, all these agencies, whatever the case, should be more public-centered. But I always think the plot twist is, what if they are? Just that the definition of public in our country has changed so much over the past 30 years. The public in 1974 wasn't the public of 2023.
Definitely.
But how have we spent so long trying to undo that? Doesn't make sense to me.
Just to unpack with your example, do you think the planning and design principles in this park, for example, actually achieve in your mind what is a successful public space?
I do think so, because I mean, when you mention the fact that there need to be amenities, amenities are there. Design is also used as a way to facilitate not only aesthetic or beauty, but also function.
Yes.
When it comes to circulation, the way they describe the park, it's so well designed, movement and whatnot is coordinated. In fact, the way the process engineers or whatever designed this so well that it integrates with the university traffic and activity as well. And that's foot traffic, forget the car traffic.
Definitely.
That itself, they deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for that. You know what I'm saying? Being able to manage student traffic and just civilian traffic and make no one feel out of place. I think it ticks all the boxes for a well-functioning public space.
Thank you so much for that. Now that we understand and we've taken public space from a developed country's point of view towards a developing country that we can relate to, have found liftoff in public space, let's take it and bring it back to South Africa. In South Africa, the challenge here is that the promise of public space takes on a very historical dimension, which you mentioned earlier. During apartheid, the equal rights of all citizens to access quality public spaces was denied to majority of non-white South Africans. I think there's even a bit of trauma that still lives, when you think of public space nowadays.
For sure.
Spatial segregation at the time enforced a very limited and discriminatory access to the city centers. And right now we're still facing that in planning, because building of townships and the how they are enlarging and growing over the years has almost deteriorated our focus on public space for township regions. And for that, many Black South Africans are still impacted by this, and especially those that cannot afford to live in the more affluent areas. During apartheid, open spaces in townships and informal settlements were often frightening spaces.
Of course.
Dirty garbage spaces, unsafe.
Dumping
and sadly,
sites.
Exactly. And sadly, this is often still the case of how people are living in and around the space, because we haven't attended to this. With that, with that being shared, how do we begin to reclaim public space for people in our communities in these marginalized areas?
So I'm going to say something which might sound like it's quoted from the Bible somewhere. Someone might say this is something that I can't say a name, but whoever said when the blah blah happened and the ocean parted, But my approach would be build the space and people will come.
There we go.
It's that simple.
Yes.
We could sit here sort of trying to debate the best strategy,
the
best marketing strategy,
location.
But I've never seen. Think about a school. We used to get grief as the boys because we'd play football anywhere where there was a green space. No one ever had to market that to us. Build the space and people will come. Beyond that, include the people in the process. While you're building the space or doing the earthworks or excavating, hire the local community. So that when someone walks past there, they can say, my mom was part of that project.
Definitely.
My dad was part of that project. My dad paid for my schooling because he was working on this project. Build the space and people will come, man. Get your resources in a row. Stop, wasting money, irregular expenditure. Just build the space. People will come. And that just uplifts the whole character of the area.
It almost creates a sense of belonging, a sense of pride, which I think was often lost in translation when you think of apartheid planning versus now, is that people were not involved, as you said. People were not involved in the planning processes. Instead, they were very much told where you can be and where you can't. And now often you see how township areas, informal settlement areas have been left to its own discretion, and people have not been involved in terms of turning their situation around. Instead, many a times as planning professionals, we have actually stepped in and said, this is what we're going to do.
And we impose.
Exactly.
And we say, please sign here so I can get my invoice paid.
Definitely. Payment milestone 1, 2, and 3. Thank you so much. Where the project is up and running, it's the same thing with our political system. Every 4 years we're having new development plans, new spatial planning programs, and we don't finish projects. And I feel that with your suggestion about let's get the community involved and push people-driven planning, we can actually attend to what is and not what we think it should be.
I think it's straightforward, man. Like, This is why I have so much hope for our country. We're experiencing a lot of problems, but those problems aren't as complex as what they seem. They really come from a lack of political will. They come from a lack of vision and a lack of implementation. Some of the problems that we have come down to someone who got money to do a certain key task and just didn't do it.
Definitely.
Not because there's some espionage or whatever.
No.
You were paid to build this bridge or to build 10 bridges. You ate money for 10 bridges and built no bridge. You know? It's that simple. As a service provider, as a contractor, just do what you're supposed to do. And I know this sounds very righteous and someone might say, oh my God, or this guy, he doesn't know how it feels to get a 10 million rand contract. Maybe you're right. But do you know what you're doing to the community who you've scammed out of this amenity?
Yes.
I mean, I'm from KZN. I've got cousins in rural areas. I've got family in rural areas who hear things, who know people. It's in Eastern Cape as well. It's a scary story to hear what some of these young kids have to go through. Like, talking about grade 1, grade 2, to get to school.
Yes.
Imagine a little cute Nunuza, 7 years old, is walking 5Ks to get to school. But ask yourself, why is he still going there?
Yes.
Inherently, we want better for ourselves.
Definitely.
And we will always try to bring ourselves out of situations that are against us. And that's political influence that makes it against us.
Yes.
But why can't we make it easier for that 7-year-old?
Definitely.
Build the road, build the school, build the space. You have the money for it. So what's the problem?
That's key. Why aren't we making things easier? And that is the importance of public space. That is what brings together the business, the house, and the public transport, is the public space of making things easier, making the in-between life easier, whether it be commuting, whether it be a child walking to school.
Yeah.
And, it comes down to, what are these elements of, of successful public spaces that we are not thinking about. And I think that is something to really question and give people the perspective on development at the end of the day, because we are at service to them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that is forgotten, is that we're a democracy at the end of the day.
100%.
Where is our people in terms of the decision making of where they live?
Precisely.
And, as town planners, there's a lot of conflict between our knowledge, our planning practice, and what the people want.
Yeah. Also, we aren't given the platform. Planning should be at the forefront of any developmental state's efforts. Also, our industry isn't protected enough.
Yes.
You've got engineers and architects doing planning work.
Yes.
And it's not as easy for us to do their work. Not because we're incompetent, no. Bro, we're smart. We're here. This is how we're speaking
studied
on this mic right now, very eloquently. You know what I'm saying? All I need is to be given the opportunity. All T needs is to get the opportunity to make the decisions that need to be made.
Yes.
Nothing else matters. It's that simple. Like we said, build the public space, build the school, build the bridge. Every contract issued out for public infrastructure as a contractor is your part in building this country.
Definitely.
If it was viewed that way, we'd be in a whole different place. It's not your way to get rich and buy the M4. But hey, here we are.
Here we are, actually, because now, 29 years later, we are still living that consequence. We are still living the consequence of a failed tender program that was supposed to implement water, electricity.
Supply chain.
So, before we bring this to a close, Bakithi, I just want to ask and sort of shift the discussion from planning and public space to, how do you think we can move forward without political influence in our public spaces?
I'm going to have to ask, what do you mean without political influence?
So, as SACPlan, we are governed by a professional body, obviously. Okay. And our profession is always dependent on every 4 years a new SDF, a new spatial development framework comes out, a new integrated development framework comes out. But the needs for the people remain the same. The demand for housing, the demand for water, electricity, people, which is very debatable, is still there. Yeah. So when I bring back the question, just to take a short left, is, do you think politics should still be involved in development?
Politics is at the forefront of everything. All the case studies we look at, be it Asian tigers, be it how Dubai became what it is, or the UAE rather, at the forefront, even be it China, a very controversial example, whose methods may be questionable to some, but the output is the same. They're becoming a super powerhouse now, and they're our BRICS buddies, so I love China now.
And Russia.
Hey. But political will is leadership. That's the head of the ship. That's the captain. They say a fish rots from the head. If we don't have a clear vision, clear leadership, and political will, all of our best efforts mean nothing.
Definitely.
I've been in many many meetings for a project where the success of the project relied on us getting the buy-in from the politicians, not the municipal officials, the politicians.
Imagine that.
And without that, what does your public space open framework mean
Exactly.
for X municipality? What does this park in the middle of Vugani mean for the people? Because their chat is, how will this project get me re-elected?
Exactly.
And the worst thing is, they don't even do the projects, bro. It doesn't even happen. So it's which promise sounds sexy, which promise sounds better.
Yes.
When all of us know, if you ever achieve something worthwhile, you know that it was accomplished through a series of unremarkable steps.
Definitely.
Just showing up every day, just doing the work,
and
laying every
consistency.
brick. That's it. Just laying every brick as perfectly as you can. That's all you can do.
All right, Bakithi, thank you so much for this interactive discussion that we've just had. And I think it's important that we remember that as much as we are professionals, we're also people living in the space. And at the end of the day, we are trying to leave our mark and do the best that we can for these communities that we live in, the communities that we serve in the professional space. Just to put you on the spotlight, I see that there's no birthday cakes or candles.
Damn.
So I see that you took part in an event for considering urbanization in Africa.
Yeah.
Can you share with the audience and myself what it is that drew you here, and how did you get invited?
So I was privileged enough to be invited by Blessed and the African Leadership Academy, who are based in Joburg, to be one of their to be the keynote speaker on the topic of urbanization in Africa.
All right.
My talk basically centered around the fact that looking at the population growth figures, looking at the projection for the next 10 and 20 years, Africa and Asia are at the forefront of the population figures in terms of population size. There are many constraints to that because our economies and how we're growing and the way we provide infrastructure isn't matching up with our population growth figures. However, the superpower and the hidden superpower in that is if we have the numbers, surely the economic activity should accompany that and correlate with that and make us the next economic superpowers. This is something that every other nation in the world knows except for Africa. Asia is now doing their thing, as we mentioned, China, the Asian tigers, but it's Africa.
Yes.
We're the sleeping giant, and we keep tripping over our own feet. So the discussion was around some of the insights that could come from Africa's development, and how we as Africans, because it was all professionals and some students in the space, we should be at the forefront of that development. And that's why I love that we didn't look at examples from a typical Western countries. We're looking at those that are like us, whether it be demographic wise or spatially or historically, as people, as countries that have been colonized,
Definitely.
So yeah, man, I just have a great passion for speaking, and I just love conversation, and that's what I view all these as, conversations. And I was blessed enough to have the forum and the platform to speak on something that I find very passionate about. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for actually noticing the difference in examples, because I feel a lot of the times, even just in our general schooling system, everything is westernized, and we bring design principles from Western cities. We bring history about Western cities when we should be learning about those that are closest to us 100%. And we can relate to. Yeah. Just in terms of, the studies that you had just shared on and the remarkable work that you've been doing, I do commend you in your strides that you take as a young professional. You're still a young planner. Don't worry. No one knows your age just
if
yet.
You're under 30, you're a young planner.
So thank you for that. And thank you for continuing to make strides in terms of, firstly, what you're passionate about, and continue to stay true to yourself and leave your mark in the planning world.
No, man, thank you very much. And like I said to you, I'm very proud of and privileged to be witnessing who you're becoming as you step into yourself. That's all we can do, man. We have many people who helped us get here. Wherever here is for you, it's
Yes.
subjective. And we owe it to them to not become the next Elon Musk, not become the next Steve Jobs. We owe it to them to be the best version of ourselves,
100%.
whatever that means. So, to everyone listening, if you find yourself on this journey, buckle up. It's rough. I'm not saying I'm a motivational speaker. I can help you, but shoot me a DM or an email on LinkedIn, and I can probably send some words of encouragement. But yeah, no, thank you for the platform, T, and all the best with this and everything going forward.
Thank you so much. Bakithi, I sincerely thank you for this time shared. I know I may have put you on the spot in some controversial questions. And for everyone listening today, we would really love your input. You know, if you can comment, if you can, tag us. We want to hear the people's perspective on development, and what are your thoughts on public space? What are the major aspects that we are missing as professionals? We can only learn from you, and stay tuned. There's definitely going to be another episode on just unpacking the key lessons that we've learned. We're going to bring in the academic space. We're going to bring in thoughts from the people itself. So I would love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for exploring this topic with us, and I'll see